Hello, this is James Himm Mitchell, and I'm here with this week's Lenormand Outlook. The deck that we're going to be using for this week's reading is the Piatnik Lenormand. This is what the box looks like. And the reason why I'm using it, because it was so wonderful in last week's reading, I thought, why not use it again? And like I said in that video, this is considered one of the more traditional Lenormand decks on the market. So again, this is going to be with the Piatnik Lenormand. And so what I've done is I've taken the liberty of shuffling, cutting, fanning, and picking out the 5 cards that are going to represent this week's line of 5. And if you're no stranger to my weekly videos, then you know that I always start with the middle card, because the middle card for me represents what could be the central focus or issue for the week. And before I turn that card over, let me just say that when I was shuffling the cards, the intention for this reading, as with all the readings that I do, since they're of a general nature, is what do we need to know about any possibilities and potentialities for the week ahead. So now, having said that, our middle card is the snake. Okay, so now every time this card shows up in a reading, I always go with 2 ways of looking at it. So I'm going to start with the way that I have typically seen the snake. And so the snake for me represents problems, complications, entanglements. It can represent something of a long and winding process because the snake coils. So for me, that represents a long and winding process. From an emotional standpoint, the snake card for me can represent things like, being betrayed, being jealous, being envious, things like that. And then the other thing that I see with the snake, and this is more attributed to the inset, which is the Queen of Clubs. So being a face card, this card can represent a woman. And from what my studies and understanding of that, from that perspective, is that the woman is considered clever, intelligent. She typically is known for having dark hair and wearing glasses. So it could be a couple of things could be the focus this week. It could be there's a problem or a complication that is going to become the focus of this week for some of us. For some of us, it may be dealing with a woman, like I said, who may fit that description. Or it could be that we are dealing with, going with the complication, sometimes the snake is a problem, dealing with an issue of either feeling a sense of betrayal or dealing with issues that we are feeling jealous or envious about. So those are some of the things with the snake. And so now you know that the other cards around the snake are going to inform us more about what this actually means, because Lenormand is an oracle that's best read in pairs and combinations of 3 or more. So we'll go with that next. So I'm going to start with the card on the left, and so that card always informs me what the trigger might be for the week. So here we have the scythe. So we'll come back to that in terms of what that might mean in terms of a trigger or how it's instigating the center card. The card in between is the tree. Then over on the other side of the snake, we have the ring. And then rounding out the line for the week, we have the stork. Okay, so what I do first is I look to the first card, because like I said, this represents a possible trigger for the focus card. So the scythe can represent for me something that's sudden, something that's abrupt, something that's swift, or needing a swift course of action. So it could be that the complication that arises is either going to be swift, sudden, unexpected, or it's going to need to be addressed quickly, because the scythe for me represents doing the unexpected or something that happens unexpectedly. Now, in terms of a subject, because that's a reaction to the trigger, it can represent a disconnection, a split, some form of disruption or severance, because the scythe is a tool that cuts things. So going with that as being the way I'm coming up with meanings for that. It could also be pain, hurt, and a sense of either being wounded literally or being wounded emotionally. So there's a sense of woundedness, and that could come again as a result of this sense of being lied to, or, a sense of betrayal, things of that nature. So it could be in direct response to that. So that's the scythe. So now the tree is a card that represents, for me, it represents growth and development, and that could be either on a personal or spiritual level. This card can also represent health and healing, and with that, I see it as overall well-being. And it can be a card that represents our connection to life, and it could also be something that we are rooted or grounded in, going with the roots of the tree. So those are some of my associations for the tree. On the other side, we have the ring. And so for me, the ring typically represents a commitment, a contract, a bond, a union, some form of agreement. And then the stork next to that represents some form of change or improvement. And it's very nice to see it at the end of the line, because it could be saying that we're moving from a place of hurt and pain and woundedness to a place of seeing that change or improve. And sometimes with the stork, more often than not, and this I guess is dependent on cards around it, the change is usually a positive change or a change for the better. So I'm seeing that as a very positive sign. So now the next thing we can do is we can start making meanings of the cards. And so what I do is I usually look at the pairs that are immediately flanking the center card. So here we have tree and ring. And so looking at that as a possible pairing for making meaning, I would see this as committing, going with the ring, to health or healing or overall well-being with the tree. It could be talking about the health of a relationship, going with the ring. Now, I also see the ring as, since it's a circular object, it can represent for me cycles or something that's recurring. So going with that as an idea, this card could represent like recurring, and then going back to the tree, growth, or a growth cycle. So those are some of the things that I'm seeing with that combination. Now, the next combination is our outer cards. And so that is the scythe and the stork. So for that, I'm seeing the possibility of either an abrupt or sudden, going with the scythe, change with the stork, or moving on after a disruption, a connection, or some sort of hurt or pain, because the stork is coming after the scythe. So that could be a possibility. It could also be improving, because the stork represents improvement. Improving a break or a disconnection. And since the scythe can represent something cut, it could also represent an implement that cuts. And going with the tree with the idea of health and healing, then it could be with the stork and the scythe, we have improvement after a surgery of some kind. So those are some possibilities with that pairing. And like I said, with the scythe and the tree, then we could have healing after being hurt, being in pain, or being wounded. And that could be either the physical, like I said, because then if you look at scythe as, cut, and then the tree as healing, that could be surgery. So it could be the physical, or it could be on the emotional, healing a sense of being emotionally hurt or emotionally in pain, or, emotional woundedness. So it could be that. So then the next thing we can do is look at the pairing of the ring and the stork, and then we could see that as possibly being, changing, an agreement, improving, a commitment or a relationship, or a relationship or commitment changes and improves in the future. Again, going with the idea that the stork is at the end of the line. So this is how things would end up. So I'm seeing that. And this is the idea of like, after some time, because we have the tree here, the tree is a sign of something that takes time, and then the snake being something that's a longer winding process. So it would be, after some time, there may be some improvement. It wouldn't be something that would happen suddenly or right away, because the scythe is on the other side. If it was on the end of the line, it could suggest that it would be happening, sooner rather than later, but I'm seeing it in the reverse. And then if we take a look at the tree and the snake, because that forms a pair, the tree and the snake, it could suggest that healing, no matter what kind of healing it is, it may be complicated, or that it is going to be complicated, or there may be a complication coming because it comes after the tree. And again, it will be going back with the idea of what I said about the tree representing patience, because it takes time to grow, and then the snake being a long and winding process. And then if we look at these three cards, the first three, because it's just jumping out at me, that the scythe, the tree, and the snake could mean healing the hurt, going with these, if you read these two first, healing the hurt or pain of a betrayal or a lie, because the snake is the center focus. So that would be one way of looking at that. Could also be, the healing from a surgical procedure that takes some time, going back to the tree, due to some kind of complication, which is the snake. It could also be that the surgical procedure, going with the scythe, was complicated to begin with. There are, minor surgeries and major surgeries. So maybe this is a form of major surgery. And as a result of that, it was a complicated process. And that is why the healing will take some time. So there's a couple of ways to read that, And again, the idea of doing the general readings is that, I'm putting out possibilities, and then based on where you're at in your life experience, you could see if that resonates with you or not, and if you happen to read the cards, and how would you create meaning based on where you're at with the cards that are here on the table. And so since we looked at the tree and the snake, now I'm going to look at the snake in the ring, and that could be a recurring, my idea with the ring being recurring, a recurring complication. Or it could represent complications, going with the snake, with a commitment, an agreement, or even the literal sense, because sometimes the ring represents contract, so it could be, complications with the contract. So I'm seeing that. And then the last thing we can do with the line is to try and create meaning. And the way you would do that is you would take each of the cards and try and take some of the keywords that we've kind of talked about and create a sentence going from left to right. So looking at the cards, and based on what I've seen in the cards, I would create maybe one or two sentences, because that if you watch my videos long enough to know, I just don't create one. I sometimes see lots of things. So this would be the first one. Talked about healing, going with the tree, from betrayal, going with the scythe, is complicated, keeping with the idea the focus of the snake would be complication. But making the commitment, which is the ring, leads to some change or improvement, which is the stork. Now, some of that change or improvement could be the sense of moving on, because one of the other things about the stork is about making a move. So it could be like a literal move of some kind. So it could be like at the end of the situation, at the end of the complication, at the end of the problem, there is the decision to move on. And that could come here with the scythe. If we go back to the pairing of the scythe and the stork, then this would happen, maybe, a break, break up, going with the ring being a relationship, a break up, or a split of some kind. And then the person or persons, take the action to move on after that. So that's another thing with here. It could be moving on after a relationship, a long-term relationship, a serious relationship. And again, that would be due to some form of complication or problem. And it could be, the problem could be, again, a sense of betrayal. It could be, one party lied to the other person and got caught, got found out. It could be, one partner is jealous of or envious of the other for whatever reason. There's lots of things that could be read into that. So the other sentence could be, if we take out the word betrayal and we put in surgery, then it could be, healing from a surgery that was complicated, but making the commitment to heal leads to some change or improvement. So I'm seeing that. So we could look at it one or two ways. I'm feeling compelled with the other one, because I'm thinking that it's more of a relationship-oriented thing with the ring in there. So I'm seeing that. So that would be the way to read the line of 5 after making all the meanings we can from all the pairs in the line. So the next thing we can do is we can turn to the playing card inserts to create more meaning that may give us some more information or add another nuance that we can't see with the cards as they are. So we'll get to that. Okay, so now we're going to turn our attention to the playing card inserts on the cards. So the cards that we have on the sides, we have the Jack of Diamonds. On the tree, we have the Seven of Hearts. On the snake, we have the Queen of Clubs. On the ring, we have the Ace of Clubs. And on the stork, we have the Queen of Hearts. So right now, I see two suits that are in majority. So we have two hearts. So hearts for me represent things like domestic matters, matters of the heart, relationships. And that's not just intimate relationships, but that could be all level of relationships. It's about our ability to relate to other people. And then with the two clubs could work. I said the word work. So for me, sometimes I see clubs as a suit that represents work, but it can also be, in cartomancy, it's said to be a suit of difficulty and challenges. And if you stop and think, most of the playing cards that are on Lenormand cards are the more challenging ones, like in this particular case the snake. Then we keep in mind we also have the fox, which is sometimes a challenging card, so keep that in mind. So sometimes it's directed at the more challenging cards in the deck, so that's where the idea of challenges comes out. So we could have like challenges or difficulties in a relationship, going back to what I was saying about maybe the sense of a disruption in a relationship that may lead to some form of severance, however that is expressed, but it could be reinforcing that whole idea. So the way we look for the hidden dynamics, which is what I'm about to do, is we look at the outer pair first, and we take the value of the cards. So in cartomancy, a jack is 11, and so we'll have 11. And then the Queen of Hearts is 12, so we have 12. So 11 and 12 is 23. So the 23rd card in the deck is the mice. And so the mice is a card that can represent things like stress, worry. It could represent some form of loss. It could be loss that happens over a period of time because it represents a gradual loss. So it could be, whatever the situation here is, it's either rooted in stress, or stress is one of the factors as a result of the experience. So that could be one or two ways. So now what we can do is we can look at the inner pairs to see what other card would be part of the hidden dynamic. So we have the 7 from the Seven of Hearts, and then we have the Ace, which is 1 for the Ace of Clubs. That would add up to 8. And so the 8th card in the deck is the Coffin. So here we have the Coffin. So the Coffin card can represent typically something coming to an end, some form of change. I see this card as a card that represents closure, finalizing something. It can also represent limitation or restriction, because the idea is that the coffin is a box, and so it can only hold so much. So there could be a sense of like being boxed in, being limited or restricted in some way. It could also be from an emotional standpoint, because I talked about with the snake, and this is how the dynamic cards are read. They're read in conjunction to the middle card. So in terms of this, if the idea here with the snake is a sense of betrayal or being lied to, then it could be, or even with the jealousy and envious part of that, then how are those emotions, those negative challenging emotions, boxing us in, limiting and restricting us? We might, as a reaction to that, choose to become emotionally closed off or shut down. So I'm seeing that. So if I was to read the pair, the coffin and the mice, or reading it the other way around because the mice was the first card, mice and coffin could be, what do we need to do to limit or restrict some form of stress? And that could be with the physical thing. It could be whatever that surgical procedure was that I was seeing earlier, could be stress induced. you know, and so as a result of that, the person may have to find ways in their everyday living to work on reducing their stress. There's no such thing as eliminating stress. There's different levels of stress. We all go through stress with everything, so it's just on a varying degree of the stress level. But some people live life, you know, with a high degree of stress, or you know, a great amount of stressors, and so sometimes the body reacts to that, and then in order to heal, and part of the healing process here would be, by the way, the coffin can represent rest. So, you know, in this period of rest and recovering, the person may either one or two things, either have to have a lot of bed rest in which they can't do anything, because sometimes the coffin represents no or nothing, so they can't do anything, or they're being asked not to do anything, or they're being asked to limit and restrict stress. And so the only way that can happen is that you look at your reaction and response to things, because that's really what has to change. It may be not about the environment changing, but it's about your reaction and response to things in your environment that may need to change. So I'm seeing that as a possibility. The other thing we can do with the playing cards is we can add the value of all the cards all the way across to see what possible card would be, you know, the final card or the summation card from the playing card standpoint. So again, going back to the cards, we have 11, we have 7, okay, 11 and 7. Then we have the queen, which is 12. Then we have an ace, which is 1, and then another queen, which is 12. So we have a total of 43. Since there are 36 cards in the deck, I take the numbers and reduce them together. So 4 and 3 is 7, and it brings us right back to our center card. Isn't that interesting? So again, it's bringing us right back to the focus here. So the focus is on some sort of problem or complication or difficulty, something that is, you know, producing a sense of, you know, maybe a sense of envy, a sense of feeling threatened, a sense of feeling betrayed. You know, it could be, in order to rectify this problem, it could be a long and winding process, because there may be lots of entanglements or, you know, things like that along the way. It's not going to be, you know, a straight shot. There may be twists and turns that we may have to anticipate in that. So that is our line of 5, looking at things from the perspective of the pips or the playing cards. So now the last thing we can do is we can look to the numbers and create what we call the essence card, which is the final advice card. So we'll get to that. Okay, so now we're going to round out the reading by using the numbers on the cards to look for what I call the essence card. So now I always say this in every video. So the Lenormand for me has 3 features that I use, you know, in a reading. So it has the central image, it has the playing card insert, and then it has the number. So taking the numbers, we have 10 for the scythe, we have 5 for the tree, 7 for the snake, 25 for the ring, and 17 for the stork. That gives us a total of 64. And going with what I did with the hidden dynamics card is, since it's over 36, I will take the 6 and the 4, add it together, and that adds up to 10. And look, we have another card in the line from that. So the final advice card here is the scythe card. So again, could be, you know, going with the center card, again being the complication. It could be, again, something that we may need to address sooner rather than later in some regard, or it could be like being on the lookout for some unexpected or sudden complication this week. So again, we have the scythe, which is the card that represents swift action. It represents something sudden, something unexpected. You know, it could be, you know, what is it that we may need to eliminate or remove this week? The tree represents growth and development. It represents health and healing. And it represents our connection to life, and considering what is it that we're rooted and grounded in. It could be something that creates a sense of stability for us, especially if we are experiencing something that happens unexpectedly. You know, we may have to remember what we're rooted and grounded in this week. The snake, being the focus card, is that we may be faced with some problem, some complication, something that's complex that may take some time to disentangle ourselves from, so to speak. So that could be the snake. Then the ring is asking us to be mindful of, in light of all the cards that came before, be mindful of any commitments or agreements that we make this week, you know, or any kind of recurring complications this week. And then rounding out the line is like, whatever the commitment is that we're going to make, it should be with the intention of something changing and improving for the better. So this has been your line of 5 for the week. I am James Himm Mitchell, and I look forward to sharing this space here again with you in our next video. And until then, have a great week and take care.